On the notes page before, you guys were asked to look at these two functions and just kind of think about them, reflect about them. What do you notice about these two functions? What kind of questions or what things do you wonder about them? And then how do you think that they might be able to be applied to represent marginal tax rates? What could you do? So I want to go over that last question. How could these be applied with marginal tax rates? Okay, and it kind of takes on two different forms, one for each equation. So the first being that, let's say I'm looking at this graph right here. I'm going to let my x-axis represent my income. And to make this graph maybe a little bit more realistic, I'm going to change a couple numbers. Let's say that's 20,000 and maybe this is 40,000. Okay. This y-axis, I'm going to have it represent my tax bracket. What tax bracket do I fall into with my given taxable income? I guess I should say this is taxable income, not just income. So maybe more realistically, this would be like a 20% bracket or a 40% bracket. I'm just kind of making up these numbers, not going off of actual tax brackets. Okay, so reading that graph, I would be able to say that let's assume maybe my taxable income is $20,000. Okay, so let's suppose my taxable income is $20,000. Then I fall into the 20% tax bracket. Okay, and I could do this for any income. Maybe I'm looking at an income of 30,000 or 25,000 or 40,000. 40,000 looks like it's falling into about the 40% tax bracket. If that were 60,000, 60,000 is falling in the 60% tax bracket. Now remember from the previous video that explains marginal tax rates, just because I fall into the 40% tax bracket does not mean that I pay 40% on all of my income, right? That's the maximum percent I pay on a portion of my income. So even if I were to fall into this 40% tax bracket, okay, even if I were to fall into that, I am only paying 40% of my taxes from this amount of money on. Okay, this amount of my taxable income. So my taxable income from, we're going to estimate that at like 30,000. So only $10,000 of my income is paid at the 40% tax bracket. The other $30,000 I pay 20% on. Okay, so that's how I would read a piecewise function that looks like this in relations to these marginal tax rates. Now the other option is to look at a graph like this, okay? And I'm still going to keep my x-axis the same. I'm going to keep it as my taxable income. So again, just to make it a little more realistic, we'll change these to tens of thousands, 20,000, 40,000, and so on. Okay, my y-axis though, instead of being what tax bracket I fall into, it's going to be the amount I owe. Okay, how much do I owe in taxes? Because that amount is changing in a more linear fashion. Okay, that amount, it's not going to necessarily be the same from 20,000 to 20,001, right? That amount of income is or that amount of owed taxes is changing. So again, I'm just kind of making up numbers here. Let's say that this 2 is $5,000 and this 4 we'll say represents $10,000. Okay. So if I were reading this graph, I would say that, and this is probably if I want to relate it similarly, let me change that. I'm going to go 10,000 and 20,000. Okay, so if I want to read this graph, I would say that, okay, if I have a taxable income of $20,000, okay, so again, let's suppose my taxable income is $20,000. Then I owe, we'll kind of guess that that is about $5,000 in taxes. Okay, I would owe $5,000 in taxes. And it looks like up until about $40,000 that this is the same linear function, same rate of change. So up until $40,000 on this graph, they must all fall into the same bracket. And these are not, I'm going to preface it with, these two are not necessarily related to each other. Okay, at $40,000, it looks like the tax rate really must increase because your rate of change or your slope on that graph is much higher. Okay, and then it looks like the tax rates might stay a little bit of the same, okay, as we go. But there should not be, I mean, if you're looking at the tax brackets, at least how they are defined in our country, there shouldn't be a place where like at $40,000 I owe this, but at $40,001 I'm way up here. Okay, the way that our marginal tax rates are defined, that when we look at the taxes owed, those should be somewhat connected. All right. Let me know if you have questions on this. And we'll talk more about piecewise functions in the next videos.